Rebecca Miller hurled her wine glass across the marble floor. The sharp crash of shattering crystal cut through the soft jazz and murmuring voices of the Salt and Soil restaurant. Heads turned. The deep red wine spread like blood, pooling at the feet of Marcus, the calm, dark-skinned server who had just been humiliated in front of a room full of diners. "And who do you think you are, teaching me about food?" she spat, her voice echoing. Marcus didn't flinch. He simply crouched, gathering the shards with his bare hands. A thin line of blood bloomed across his palm. "I'm sorry to have disappointed you," he said quietly, voice steady, almost serene. Rebecca laughed sharply, tossing her hair back. "Pathetic! A black waiter lecturing me in one of the finest restaurants in New York City." The room froze. Silence settled over the linen-draped tables. Marcus stood, meeting her gaze. There was no anger in his eyes, only a depth, cold and unreadable, like the calm before a storm. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the kitchen. No one knew that within minutes, when the final curtain lifted, the entire restaurant, and Rebecca herself, would learn the truth about the man she had just humiliated. He wasn't just a waiter. He was the man who built this place from nothing. The sound of shattering glass exploded through the elegant silence of Salt and Soil. Every head turned. Candlelight that once danced on crystal glasses now flickered across shards of broken glass scattered across the marble floor. Rebecca Miller stood tall in her crimson evening gown, eyes burning with contempt. Across from her, Marcus, the tall, composed black waiter, knelt to pick up the fragments one by one. Red wine spread like a dark stain across the stone, seeping into the cracks like blood after a quiet battle. "Who do you think you are, correcting me about wine?" Rebecca's voice sliced through the air, sharp and echoing off the soft music and fine walls. The pianist in the corner froze mid-note. Silence flooded the room. Marcus looked up. There was no anger in his eyes, no fear, only calm, deep and still, like the surface of a lake after rain. He bowed slightly, his voice low but clear. "I apologize if I've offended you, ma'am." Rebecca laughed, a cold, cutting laugh that made several guests flinch. "Apologize? A man like you should remember his place. You serve, you don't lecture." Around the room, people avoided her gaze, some frowning in quiet disapproval, others simply watching. The air felt tight, ready to snap. Marcus said nothing. He quietly gathered the last piece of glass, a small shard that sliced his hand open. Blood mixed with the spilled wine. He stood, wiped his hand with a white cloth, the fabric turning crimson at one corner. The restaurant manager approached, whispering urgently, "Marcus, let me handle this." But Marcus shook his head. No need. His eyes met Rebecca's, not angry, not cold, but steady and unreadable. "Thank you," he said softly, "for reminding me of something important." Rebecca smirked, her tone dripping with superiority. "And what's that supposed to mean?" Marcus replied evenly, "That not everyone sitting at the table understands the value of the meal." He turned and walked back toward the kitchen. The door swung shut behind him, leaving a trail of whispers in his wake. Somewhere in the corner, a man murmured to his friend, "He's finished. No one talks to her like that and keeps their job." His friend leaned in, voice barely above a breath. Or maybe she just made the biggest mistake of her life. The kitchen door closed behind Marcus, but the echoes of the dining room still rang inside his head. Cold white light poured from the industrial lamps above, glinting off his hands, still streaked faintly with blood. The air was thick with the smell of roasted herbs, sizzling butter, and tension. Javier, the sous chef, looked up, his jaw clenched tight. "You just let her do that to you, Marcus? You let her throw a glass at you in front of everyone?" Marcus turned on the faucet, rinsing his hands under the steady stream of water. His voice was low, steady, calm. "I let her show everyone who she really is. Sometimes silence says more than anger ever could." Javier shook his head. "If it were me, I'd have kicked her out myself." Marcus dried his hands slowly, the faintest smile forming on his lips. "No need. She'll leave on her own. Just not yet." He walked toward the dessert counter, where rows of delicate chocolate molds waited to be filled. A young line cook, Emily, glanced up at him nervously. "How can you stay so calm after what she did?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He began drizzling warm caramel over the glossy surface of the chocolate sphere, his movements precise, deliberate, almost meditative. "Calm doesn't mean weak," he said softly. "It means I don't waste energy on rage. I save it for results." Emily frowned slightly. "What kind of results?" Marcus lifted his eyes, and for a second, a quiet spark of fire flickered there. "She wanted to humiliate a waiter," he said evenly, "but she forgot. Sometimes the waiter owns the restaurant." The kitchen fell silent. Every pair of eyes watched as Marcus began to craft a special dessert, the kind that only appeared when something significant was about to happen. He called it redemption. At the center of a pristine white plate, he placed a perfect chocolate sphere, gleaming under the lights, its surface so smooth it mirrored his face. Around it, he painted streaks of sauce like an abstract painting, art born from control, not chaos. Hidden inside the shell was a small silver plaque engraved with his name and title, Marcus Reed, founder and executive chef, Salt and Soil. He set the plate carefully on a silver tray, draped it with a linen cloth. The room held its breath as he lifted the tray. Javier muttered, half in awe, half in fear, "The storm's coming." Marcus paused at the door, turned back, and smiled faintly. "No, Javier, the storm started when she walked in. I'm just here to clear the sky." He pushed through the door. Warm light spilled onto his face from the dining room. Rebecca's laughter rang out again, loud, careless, oblivious. She had no idea that in a few minutes her world was about to flip upside down. When Marcus stepped out of the kitchen, time seemed to pause. The quiet hum of conversation, the clinking of forks and glasses, all faded into a tense stillness. Every step he took toward Rebecca's table carried a gravity that drew every pair of eyes in the room. Rebecca was still laughing with her friends, recounting the funny story of how she had put a rude waiter in his place. The laughter around her was uneasy, brittle. It died quickly when Marcus stopped beside the table, a silver tray balanced effortlessly in his hands. "For you, ma'am," he said calmly. "A special dessert from the house." Rebecca smirked. "Finally learning how to serve properly?" Marcus didn't respond. He gently placed the plate before her, a dark chocolate sphere resting perfectly at its center. His tone was even, but there was weight behind every syllable. "This dessert," he said, "is called redemption. It's reserved for those who deserve a chance to make things right." Her friends laughed again, but the sound faltered when Marcus poured hot caramel over the dessert. The chocolate shell melted slowly, revealing something hidden within, a gleam of silver. Rebecca frowned, leaning forward. What is this?" Marcus straightened his posture, voice calm, but carrying clearly across the entire dining room. "Marcus Reed, founder and executive chef, Salt and Soil." The name hit the air like thunder. The laughter died completely. A hush rippled across the restaurant. Rebecca stared at the engraved plaque, her face draining of color. You own this place?" Marcus's expression didn't change. "I built this place, brick by brick, recipe by recipe. Every detail from the first spoon to the last glass you threw carries my name. And I've always believed a restaurant serves more than food. It serves dignity." A man at a nearby table, a well-known food critic from the Chicago Tribune, lifted his phone, recording the moment. "This story," he said softly, "will be told, but not the way you hoped, Ms. Miller." Marcus turned, addressing not just Rebecca, but everyone in the room. "In this restaurant, everyone is served with equal respect. There are no tables for the privileged and no corners for the forgotten. The true flavor of a place," he said, "comes from how we treat each other." Rebecca's voice broke as she rose, trembling. I didn't know." Marcus nodded once. "Now you do." He walked away, leaving behind a silence so deep it seemed sacred. Then, a single pair of hands began to clap. Another joined in. Within seconds, the entire restaurant erupted in applause, not polite but powerful, human. Through the small crack in the kitchen door, Javier watched with a grin. "The storm's past," he whispered. Marcus didn't look back. No, Javier, he said quietly. The storm didn't pass. It just cleared the sky. By the next morning, Salt and Soil was no longer just a restaurant. It was a movement. The video of Rebecca's public humiliation had gone viral overnight. Millions of views, thousands of comments. The caption under nearly every post read, "She insulted a waiter, not knowing he owned the restaurant." Major newspapers ran headlines. Marcus Reed, the chef who silenced the room. Reporters crowded outside the doors, camera flashes strobing across the glass. But inside, Marcus was exactly where he always was. Apron tied, sleeves rolled, inspecting the kitchen line. He adjusted a garnish on a plate, nodded approvingly, and moved on. Javier leaned against the counter, shaking his head. "You're all over the internet, man. Millions of views, and you're still chopping herbs?" Marcus smiled faintly. "The storm's passed, Javier. Now we clean up the mess it left behind." Outside, the line stretched around the block. People didn't just come for the food anymore. They came to meet the man who'd reminded the world what respect looks like. Among them was an elderly black woman who took Marcus's hand with trembling fingers. "Son," she said softly, "you did what many of us never could. You didn't yell, you didn't fight. You made them see." Marcus bowed slightly. "Respect," he said, "isn't something you demand. It's something you give, even when it's not given back." 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived at the restaurant. Inside was a handwritten letter from Rebecca Miller. The handwriting was uneven, the ink smudged. The message was simple, but raw. "All my life I thought status gave me the right to look down on others. You showed me how wrong I was. Dignity isn't in where we sit or what we drink. It's in how we treat people. I'm sorry. And thank you for the lesson I didn't know I needed." Marcus folded the letter and placed it in a drawer without a word. When Javier asked what it was, Marcus replied quietly, "People only change when they're forced to see themselves clearly. I just held up the mirror." A week later, Salt and Soil received a call from an international culinary organization. Marcus had been invited to speak at the Global Culinary Summit as the keynote speaker. The topic: when respect becomes the recipe. That night, long after closing, Marcus stood alone in the kitchen. The warm light reflected off the steel counters, glinting like gold against the dark. He looked around, at the space that had seen every drop of sweat, every scar, every insult that shaped him, and smiled. Not a smile of triumph, but of peace. Outside, the evening wind brushed against the restaurant's sign. Beneath the carved words, "Salt and Soil," someone had written in white chalk, "Respect, the ingredient every meal needs." 3 months later, Salt and Soil was no longer just a restaurant. It had become a symbol. Tourists from around the world came not merely for the food, but to taste a philosophy. Respect is a flavor that cannot be replaced. On the restaurant wall, beside a framed photo of Marcus with his kitchen team, a brass plaque gleamed under the warm light. It read, "Every meal is a conversation. Respect is the only language everyone understands." That night, Salt and Soil hosted a private dinner. No press, no billionaires, only people Marcus had helped along the way. Former employees, struggling students, young chefs who once had doors slammed in their faces but now stood on their own. Emily, the former intern, now the new sous chef, raised her glass with trembling hands. "Chef Marcus didn't just teach us how to cook," she said, voice breaking. "He taught us how to be decent human beings." Marcus smiled gently, lifting his glass of water instead of wine. "Kindness isn't a strategy," he said softly. "It's a choice." After the dinner, he stepped outside into the crisp Chicago evening. The city glowed gold under the streetlights. A group of college students paused in front of the restaurant's sign, pointing at the chalk line beneath it. "Respect, the ingredient every meal needs." They laughed, took a photo, and walked on. Marcus watched them, smiling quietly. They might not know the full story, but they understood the message. The next morning, Marcus opened his inbox to find an email from Rebecca Miller. This time, there was no apology, just a photo of her volunteering at a community kitchen for underprivileged kids. The caption read simply, Maybe I've finally found a way to make things right. Marcus stared at the image for a long moment, then smiled. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. That same week, a televised feature showed Marcus speaking at the Global Culinary Summit. His voice echoed across the hall. I don't want to teach people to cook better. I want to teach the world that every time you place a plate before someone, you're saying, I respect you. That's the real recipe for a perfect meal. In the audience, hundreds of young chefs rose to their feet in applause. The lights glimmered across Marcus's face, the face of a man once mocked for his skin, now celebrated as a symbol of grace, integrity, and quiet power. When the ceremony ended, Marcus paused before leaving the stage. He looked down at the wooden podium where his nameplate rested, touched it gently, and whispered to himself, It's not about titles, it's about legacy. And that legacy, written not in anger but in dignity, had become a message to the world. Respect, when given freely, can change an entire culture.